Brad Tejadas here from Canes Insight. Get on over there to Canes Insight. Check out the Canes coverage. Fall camp is here. It's time to get locked on and locked in on Miami football talk as we head toward game number one against Miami. Offensive line, when I look at what has plagued this team over the last 4 or 5 years, not necessarily last year, I think wide receiver first and foremost, but over the last 4 or 5 years, I think linebacker, since that Shaq Quarterman group has taken a hit, and we'll get to the defense at a later date. But I think offensive line now it's gotten better in some regards, but again, another position hit by injuries. But if the center is the quarterback of the offensive line and that anchor, they have to be better with Matt Lee coming in from UCF.
So again, the offensive line, when you talk about a college football program, it starts in the trenches. You have to make sure the offense and the defensive line, first and foremost, is your strong point. And when you hired Mario Cristobal, you bring in Alex Mirabal, you had to think that the offensive line would be priority number one. They came in and said that immediately. That was priority number one. You saw this past year one in the program, the offensive line really fell down very quickly. Between the injury bug and guys just not being productive, just wasn't there. And when you look at it from a measurable standpoint, we only had maybe 2 or 3 guys that you could really depend on a football field. And then they just didn't meet the eye test. We had too many guards that should have been centers. We had too many tackles that should have been guards. And, we only had about 3 or 4 guys on this football team that were bigger than 6'5", hitting that 300 mark, unfortunately, Mark. We really looked like a D2 program or a Bethune-Cookman when it came to the measurables and eye tests as far as the offensive line program. Well, you fast forward to this year, Mark, and it's really changed significantly. Just from a measurable standpoint, you got about 8 to 10 guys on this team now that are touching that 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" range already at the 300 mark. And then from a productivity standpoint, it really stands out. You mentioned Matt Lee. And before we even dive into Matt Lee and the rest of this offensive line, when you look from an overall football program, you would think the quarterback is your number one priority, and that's the guy that's going to make or break the football team, right? And I would definitely agree. But when you look at this football team in particular, especially this football season, Mark, I would actually beg to differ that Matt Lee is just important on this offense than Tyler Van Dyke, just because when you look at the productivity that Matt Lee brings, along with who is the guy behind Matt Lee if Matt Lee was to go down this year, the drop-off is very significant when we really dig deep into this offensive line. If there's one position in this offensive line group that I'm a little bit afraid about if someone was to go down, it is the center role, because at the end of the day, he is the quarterback at the offensive line. He is the guy that's going to be hand in hand with your quarterback, and he's going to be getting everybody on the same page. And if Matt Lee goes down, you either have a young up-and-coming guy in Ryan Rodriguez who doesn't have that many starts, or you're going to have to start moving and alternating some guys around and bringing someone in who doesn't necessarily play that center role, which is a big reason why you missed on a guy like Connor Liu this past cycle that ended up going to Auburn. You really wanted to land someone like him to be able to have that depth in center. But you're going to see moving forward in the recruiting aspect, Miami should be able to take care of that. But then diving into this, you talk about Matt Lee, right? Matt Lee had 1,059 snaps last year, Mark, and then he totaled for 2,783 snaps and 36 starts as a center for UCF. So when you talk about the overall total snaps and the total amount of starts that just Matt Lee brings alone to this football program, he actually brings more productivity than anyone on this football team as far as the offensive line. Then when you add in another guy in Javion Cohen coming from Alabama, ended up transferring to Miami at the guard position for us. Javion Cohen accumulated for just under 1,600 snaps at Alabama in the last 2 years. So when you look at an overall total, you're talking about 4,400 snaps between just those 2 transfers alone that you're bringing from a productivity standpoint on this football team. And those are 2 day one starters. So you talk about your center and your guard position is already locked down with just under 4,400 total snaps at elite level. Neither one of those guys allowed a sack at their other programs as well. So that's another great stat to know between those 2 guys. You're bringing back a guy in Zion Nelson who only played 1 game last year. He's going to be a guy that you don't necessarily have to rely on, but you would hope that he becomes your starting left tackle for this football team this year. You also got a guy in Jalen Rivers, who most guys on the team, whether you talk to players or guys on the staff, he's your most versatile offensive lineman on the team. He's the guy that could pretty much play anywhere on the offensive line. He is going to be the kind of guy that can go from the left tackle to the guard or even to the center spot if we need it. And then you also bring in, you got some true freshmen as well. Francis Maigoa, Samson Okinola. These were the two top offensive linemen in the country besides, I believe, Hayden Proctor. Caden Proctor was the other top tackle between those two guys. So if you land two of the top three tackles in the nation last year, again, I talked about it at the beginning with this offensive line, Mark. Just from a size and measurables standpoint, we just didn't have it. And you talk about Javion Cohen, 6'6" guy. Francis Maigoa, 6'6" guy, 315 pounds. Samson Okinola, 6'6", 330 pounds. You bring in another guy in Tommy Kinsler, who's 6'7", 320 pounds as well. I mean, you're bringing back other guys in Inez Cooper and Mike McCoy, who, again, are both 6'6", 300-plus pounds. So you're starting to finally see the quality depth that Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal is building and bringing to this program. It's starting to quickly form into an Oregon offensive line, and that's what you like to see. You're starting to look like you're about 8 guys deep on this offensive line group. I think with one more full recruiting staff season with Miami, I think this team can really do some damage in the offensive line group. And now it's going to shift your priority to the defensive line in the trenches when it talks about recruiting, but that'll be for another day.
Yeah, the recruiting rankings obviously measure each player exactly the same, but when you're building an offensive line leaning program and you pick up 2 of the top 3 offensive tackles in the country, and we'll see what their readiness is and how much they need to contribute right away. Any thoughts about that in terms of Maui Goa and Okinola and how much they're going to be needed this fall?
So, I mean, first and foremost, I think Francis Maigoa is going to be your starting right tackle. He will be a day one starter as a true freshman. I think every school in the country wanted this young man, and it was for great reasons. I think no matter where he landed, I think he probably would have ended up being a day one starter. That just goes to show you how good of a talent this young man has. So I think he's going to be a starter. I think someone in Samson Okinola doesn't have to necessarily start right away. He could be someone that I think halfway in this football season, you'll start to get a lot more snaps, hopefully this year. I would love to see him not burn his red shirt this year. That would be great just to get him in 4 games. But he's someone that as the football season goes on, I wouldn't see a problem with him getting more snaps as well, just because from a talent standpoint, what he brings to the table. And even a guy in Tommy Kinsler, as we know, the injury bugs happen. And when injuries do happen, you need someone to step in right away and fill those spots. And unfortunately, our issue last year wasn't necessarily just the productivity standpoint, but that first guy that went down, the next guy that came back up, from a size standpoint, it just was a huge drop off. And having someone like Tommy Kinsler as your second or third guy in rotation to come in there, that's not a drop off. I could tell you that right now. He's one of the biggest guys on the football team, and he'll be one of the biggest guys on the football field.
Brad, this was awesome. We appreciate you breaking down the offense. It was an exhaustive breakdown, folks. We hope you appreciate it. Get more at Canes Insight. Is there anything going on that you've got working right now that you would like to highlight?
No, man. Just continue to show some love over at canesinsight.com. We got great forums over there. We're constantly dropping new news. Canes Insight on YouTube as well. We do great interviews. We had JoJo Trader and a few of the other guys. Chance Robinson on the show, a few weeks ago, and also, some former players. So go ahead and check that out over at Canes Insight. And just follow me on Twitter at Tejeda Brad for all your most recruiting news and Canes football updates.
Brad, good to see you. Thank you so much for knocking this out for us.
No problem, man. Thank you as always, and go Canes.